You are part of and participants in two of the greatest stories that have ever been told. One is the story of the Christian church, the Church of Jesus Christ. And the second is the story of the United States of America. Two stories which we are gratefully a part of, even to this day. Those that make polls, the greatest this or the greatest that, the greatest sports team, the greatest basketball player, the GOAT, as they say, the greatest movie, greatest achievements, car, greatest chef. Those poll makers, well, they all have their metrics and their biases. And in the end, we know that only one judge ultimately matters. We can only be humble vis-a-vis God's judgments. But in the meantime, I find it humbling, well, yes, also fun to participate in some of those polls, but I find it a source of much gratitude to be able to reach out to you today with my heart and to say, what an awesome privilege. These two stories are lamps set high on a hill. If every breath that we breathe today was exercised to express our thanksgiving, there wouldn't be enough breaths to thank enough for the gifts of these two stories in our lives. If every thought that we pondered today, going all the way to the end of a 24-hour period, it would not be enough thoughts to encapsulate all of the benefits, all of the privileges, and all of the responsibilities of being in these two stories. It's kind of funny how awkward it is for me to even place these two stories side by side in the same thought process. And yet, I'm calling it as I see it. Every church that I've ever served as a pastor has two flags that are placed in the altar area, in the chancel area, on the same level. The Christian flag and the flag of our nation. In seminary, we had a professor, my very first year, first semester, his name was Herb Edwards. And Herb would say, he was an African American serving African American churches in his earlier years. And he said he got into a conversation with his deacons, his church leaders, about perhaps we should remove the U.S. flag from the chancel area because we have the cross. That is our predominant symbol for our lives as a Christian. They put it to a vote, and his wishes were not upheld. And so Herb wasn't stymied by that. He took the U.S. flag, the American flag, and he took it down off of the pole, off of the pedestal, and he put it in his office on one of his shelves, only to find on the next Sunday that there it was, back on the pole, back on the standard. And so the next week, and no words were spoken to him about it, the next week he decided, all right, I'm going to hide it. So he took the American flag down, he put it in the secretary's office back behind some archives, and lo and behold, the next Sunday, without any words being expressed, there the flag was again. And then he said, all right, I'm going to climb up into the attic. I've never been up in the attic, but he went up to the attic. He found the most obscure spot in the attic and folded that flag up and put it behind something. And you guessed it, the next Sunday, the same flag, not a new one, but the flag he hid was up. And then he noticed that one of the deacons at the end of the service was folding up the flag to take it home, and He said, well, what are you doing? And the deacon said, well, clearly, I'm just trying to save us some time. So what do we take away from the story, a story like that? Well, there's probably many, many takeaways. One of them for me is that when I enter into a church, a congregation, which I'm a visitor of, and I notice that there is no American flag in that sanctuary, I notice that. And I think to myself, wow, that's a statement. That's an intentional statement. And I'm kind of proud of them. I'm kind of saying to myself, wow, you recognize that there is a little bit of a struggle in our loyalties, and sometimes those loyalties, important as they are, they can be in conflict with one another. Or at least it's complicated. Two clusters, the flags representing two clusters of meanings for us. How tricky it is to be loyal to both God and to be loyal as a citizen of a nation on the other. But my larger takeaway from that story of that beloved professor is that I'm realistic. Ben, don't fight this battle head on. There's enough space in our minds and in our hearts to work on how to be true to these two stories. These two, as I mentioned, clusters of loyalty. There is significant overlap. And yet there's also distinctives, areas where they don't overlap. Well, this is Memorial Day weekend. And on Monday, we celebrate Memorial Day. It's also the pandemic era all over the earth. It's a phase in this pandemic era where in this state and throughout the U.S., we're taking the initial steps to reopen public spaces, our economic life, and all other kinds of living. One of the things that these two stories have in common is a very important theme, and that is sacrifice. Remember, be thankful, and create a space for reflection, for even regret, for growing into a more perfect, loyal citizen of both our kingdom life in God and our citizen life in this nation. Captain Key is quoted that war is hell, freedom is expensive, death is painful, and faith still matters, especially in foxholes. That story is brought to life for me by a Sunday school teacher named Bill Smith. When I was a 7th grader, I sat there like most 7th graders, kind of not sure I wanted to be there. But one day Bill Smith said to us, you know, I'm grateful in my life that I became a Christian literally in a foxhole on the battlefield. And I promised God that if I could get home, that I would serve the Lord, that I would try to be faithful. And we 7th graders would look at each other. Even faithful to teach Sunday school to 7th graders? Wow, this guy really held up his side of that bargain. But we got it, and I still remember that. Jesus put it like this: greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. Jesus is our friend. He laid down his life for us. Because he lives, we can face tomorrow. He loves us. He dwells within us. Can we not live for him and simultaneously live as citizens in this nation, seeking unity in our purpose as Americans to create one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all? to be in the story, actively pursuing that more perfect union, establishing freedoms, rights, just laws, and opportunities. So on this weekend, this Memorial Day and Monday, Monday, we will remember, we will be thankful. We will pray for God's guidance and light, that our nation might endeavor to always bless not only those who live within our shores, but to bless the whole world that God has created and loves. A more perfect union is a thought process that includes, as I alluded to, regret. And yet sometimes it seems that the oxygen is completely taken out of the room for us to have serious regrets, reflections, ponderings. What have we done that we could do better? But there's no persons who have better articulation of those kinds of reflections than those who return from the battlefront, those who return from war. They're oftentimes the ones that are having regrets about deployment details, about strategies, about equipment, about overall purpose, and then it kind of winds its way back to the place where, like Abraham Lincoln, like Roosevelt, like Woodrow Wilson, and all of our leaders, they at times say, I wish we could have done more. I wish we could have done some things differently. And they usually kind of focus in on that thought process of, I regret that we did not do more to maintain the peace, to make a more lasting, building a lasting peace. And again, this phrase, to make a more perfect union. It requires honesty, to lift up all the sacrifices, all the costs, all the buildup, all the outcomes of all the engagements, and all the efforts to resume and ensure a healing peacetime. That's what Memorial Day means to me. We are so gifted, you and I, to live in a land where we have this privilege to have and freedoms of thinking and speech. Although Memorial Day was established to remember and be grateful for the sacrifices made on behalf of servicemen and women, in these days, we are also very mindful of sacrifices of our medical professionals, of our first-time responders, and these are not just sort of lip service words. We've got a day coming up here this weekend and on Monday to give thanks to God for the sacrifices and to work for all of us to build unity, to create a more perfect union. So I want to end this first part just by saying maybe a little thing to look forward to is Jesus has a prayer for us in this time. He prayed it for his disciples. And in that prayer, the meaning or the message that I'd like to share with you is, imagine Jesus glorified in you.